Good evening, this is Miss Jill Louise Starr, and this evening I'm going to be discussing wars of the third kind. Those are the wars such as happened in Bosnia and in Kosovo, and which happened all around the world, and which happened in India with the partition of Pakistan in 1948 and so on. I refer to them as, quote, wars of the third kind. They involve many different cultures, more than 5, and many different language groups, and they entail civil wars in countries. I wrote an article, and it's called The Democratic Peace Theory. In fact, it was a paper chosen in my first year of graduate school at the New School for Social Research, in which I won an award, and I was asked to discuss the democratic peace theory by the International Studies Association in Buffalo, New York. But unfortunately, I couldn't attend because I didn't have a stipend. I didn't have enough money to attend the meeting at the time. But I'm going to read the paper that I wrote here. You might find it interesting. It's entitled Democratic Peace Theory and Wars of the Third Kind by Jill Starr. Michael Doyle once wrote in Kant, Liberal Legacies in Foreign Affairs, Part 2, quote, even though liberalism and liberal democracy has achieved striking successes in creating zones of peace and, with leadership, a zone of cooperation among states similarly liberal in character, liberalism and democratic liberalism has been equally striking as a failure in guiding foreign policy outside the liberal world. Now, in discussing Woodrow Wilson and his legacy, my paper starts, quote, it is beyond the capability of mortal man to unfailingly forecast whether the progressive intercourse concerning international relations will lead to a time when peace will prevail one day over war, period. Mortal man is, however, capable of analyzing the historical development of international relations and variant schools thereof in order to predict whether future international relations will become more peaceful than in times past. In concluding a critical analysis of the divergent schools of international relations theory, I hope future international relations will gradually become substantially more peaceful than in the past century it was. This prediction of peace regarding future international relations theory is entirely contingent upon dual factors. The first, which is which particular school of international relations theory a scholar espouses by the most powerful liberal democratic regimes in the world, and second, the measure of intensity that particular school of international relations theory is espoused by those regimes and scholars. The birth of this contingent and forthcoming peace in future international relations will not be delivered to avoid the immense labor pains of turmoil, rebellion, civil war, and conflict, and also grave human rights violations, period. These maladies will continue to plague the societies of the non-liberal and non-Western world and marginal liberal democratic regimes for an imponderable time period. This time period will only end when, after the world's most powerful liberal democratic states stop conspiring to transform the entire world into one single confederacy of friendly liberal democratic nation states, as in the democratic peace theory put forth by Woodrow Wilson and the League of Nations. The United Nations is a primary example of such. This paper will challenge, subvert, and replace the Mahler School of International Relations theory called Democratic Peace with another. Democratic Peace Theory and Wars of the Third Kind. Democratic Peace Theory ensnares many scholars of international relations into ever so effortlessly believing the false tenet of the Woodrow Wilsonian prescription for world peace, dictating that, quote, in Wilson's own words, that if you want to have peace between states and countries, you must have liberal democracy within those states, end quote, period. This is a fallacy. Although the Clausewitz definition of war is stated by him, Clausewitz, as, quote, organized combat between the military forces of two or more states, end quote, has not occurred between liberal democracies since the end of World War II and the Nazis. Notwithstanding, the world has never been devoid of war, period. The democratic peace theory is not only incapable of replicating the peace currently existing between liberal democracies and successfully implanting it within non-liberal regimes, as we can see in such places as Bosnia, Kosovo, as well as in Chechnya, Georgia, and between India, Pakistan, and many other places in the world. But it is also extremely ineffective in enhancing the diplomatic relations between illiberal democracies and non-liberal regimes. History reveals the historical axiom, that since 1945, quote, 99% of the world war casualties have occurred in the Third World, what is called the Third World, such as the Balkans, North Korea, and in the former Soviet republics, end quote, period. This phenomena of wars never remained static. It has evolved into the new phenomena referred to as a scholar named Holtze, who I hold in high esteem, as wars of the third kind. Democratic peace theory is retardant. It cannot transcend the shallow notion that wars of the third kind are syndromes originating from a country's formal regime type, a malady suffered by non-liberal regimes refusing to convert their government to a liberal democracy. Democratic peace theory proponents share the narrow-minded view that after a non-liberal regime is transformed into a liberal democracy, that state will rest in peace, so to speak. It doesn't rest in peace. It purports war. And we're going to see how now. Contrary to the retrograde Newtonian notions embraced by scholars advocating the democratic peace theory, wars of the third kind cannot be remedied by inoculations of the disease itself. Treatment of that type serves as a catalyst for the wars of the third kind, only increasing their force, velocity, mass, and size. Period. Wars of the third kind not only defy empirical causal relationships, but also erupt at any time for a myriad of reasons. They tend to originate when the hostilities between homogeneous nations coexisting within the boundaries of one state become so highly intensified that one homogeneous nation descends from the others or others within the state itself, by asserting self-determination in an effort to construct a new sovereign state comprised of members derived entirely from their homogeneous nation, period. Each homogeneous nation within the state itself, Bosnia is a prime example, and so is Kosovo, attempts to dispose of the other nation through the most hideous forms of human behavior: genocide, rape, murder, and torture, and the list of human rights violations that is seemingly endless, period. In this manner, thus, the polar nations coexisting within the boundaries of one state commence a war of the third kind. This war, a war of the third kind, is a war fought entirely within the internal boundaries of one state. Democratic peace theory is clearly a malignant cause of these wars, which I will demonstrate. My claim that democratic peace theory instigates wars of the third kind is a verity I vindicate to other scholars of international relations theory by only asking them to reminisce that wars of this breed trace their genealogy to the theoretical solutions of war developed by the United States former President Woodrow Wilson and his entourage of intelligentsia and statesmen. Ironically, the most vivid feature of former United States President Woodrow Wilson's famous 14 points as a prescription for worldwide peace is also the most formidable fault thereof. At the Paris Peace Conference in Versailles in 1919, Woodrow Wilson let loose the poisonous principle of self-determination upon the world. Henceforth, self-determination has infected nations in the world like an incurable retrovirus. Wilson's 14 points and its primary principle of self-determination, in addition to the dim-wittedness of slicing up and then dishing out states like unlimited pieces of pie in order to maintain a, quote, balance of power in Europe at the Congress of Vienna, have reconstructed both the mayhem and massacres within the 20th and 21st century states today, formerly seen in the 30 Years' War ending in 1648 with the Treaty of Westphalia. All three elements All three elements, the These wars are currently burning their way through the world from one multinational state to another with flames of the democratic peace theory that the democratic peace theory cannot extinguish. Wilson insisted, quote, his peace was a superior peace because it was a democratic peace. And what would be more democratic than to give a voice to all the suppressed peoples of Europe? Wilson argued, quote, that self-determination is not only democratic because it incorporates the idea of popular sovereignty, it is also just, end quote. It is unfortunate that no statesman at either the Congress of Vienna or at the Paris Peace Conference at Versailles thought in more practical terms, such as Fichte, who recognized that, quote, the polity must coincide with the community, the ethnic and cultural composition of the state, since the community of a state precedes the polity in and of itself, end quote, period. Fichte's assumption is correct. Wars of the third kind ensue of failing states attempting to victoriously arise from the abysmal hell created by such liberal legacies, such as state-making, colonization in Africa, and self-determination created by the supposedly most liberal regimes in the world. These are all very similar, and they fail, period. Their ideal type, like India, which, quote, contains numerous communities, the population of India has 36 major languages, every religion existing in the world, and multitudes of ethnicities, end quote. Former United States President Woodrow Wilson later acknowledged, quote, this is in his own words, quote, the ignorance of his own democratic peace theory and practical application thereof of his favorite principle for reorganizing Europe of, quote, self-determination. Woodrow Wilson himself said, quote, when I gave utterance to those words that all nations had the right to self-determination, as Bill Clinton gave the Albanians in Kosovo and the Kosovo Liberation Army, Woodrow Wilson said, quote, I said them without the knowledge that nationalities existed, which are coming to us day after day, and up to 1998 into the 21st century onward, I experienced anxieties as the result of many millions of people of having their hopes raised by the democratic peace theory and self-determination by what I have said, and this is in Woodrow Wilson's own words, and who still expect those expectations to be met today. End quote, period. This fully vindicates my claim that the democratic peace theory is the disease in lieu of the cure for wars of the third kind, written by Jill Louise Starr. Thank you for joining me. I hope we've learned something here, and I hope one day peace will overcome war. Thank you for joining me, and good night. This is the Law Project Center, New York City offices. Have a good evening, and God bless.